Alright, count me in whenever we're ready to start recording.
Oh, I started recording like 10 seconds ago.
Why would you do that?
Oh, it provides banter and filler material to put at the start of the episode.
Isn't that just going to sound like lazy and amateurish?
Eric, it's what everyone's doing. Welcome to Spec Media. Enjoy the episode.
Podcast premise is confusing enough as is.
All descriptions of events, people, planets, and species are real. Like fictional real. No fake fictional facts here. The observations, commentary, and analysis are our own. Spoiler warning. If this is, somehow, your first experience with the Star Wars universe, go watch the original trilogy first.
If it isn't clear, what you're about to hear is a parody that isn't affiliated with the podcast, film, or TV series we're spoofing. I'm a notoriously bad topic picker. I traditionally pick a subject that I think I can do much more quickly than I can, and then, when I get into the middle of it, I feel compelled to do the topic justice, and we end up, traditionally, with a very long series of shows. And when it comes to the Galactic Civil War between the Sith Empire and the Alliance to Restore the Republic, what I and most historians just call the Rebel Alliance, or Rebels for convenience, there's just no way to cover it all in one podcast. It's just too long. Historians disagree on how long the Galactic Civil War lasted. It really depends on who you ask, or when you think the rebellion actually came together, or which sources you trust to determine when or how it ended. I've seen estimates as short as 5 years, which ignore most of the early time of the Galactic Empire. I've seen estimates as long as 40, which stretch the battle out decades after the Battle of Endor. But traditionally, historians estimated that the Galactic Civil War lasted 23 years. Think about that. This is a war that makes World War II look small. It lasted 4 times as long and spanned hundreds of star systems. We just don't have time to cover it all. 2 great battles define the Galactic Civil War. The first is the Battle of Yavin. The second is the Battle of Endor, which is perhaps my favorite battle I've covered in all possible timelines and multiverses. And as you'll see, covering just one part of one of those great battles requires multiple episodes. Most histories of the Battle of Endor are woefully incomplete, or at least, in my opinion, focused on the wrong things. These histories focus on the assault on the second Death Star and the death of the Emperor. They celebrate the hero of the rebellion, Wedge Antilles, who launched a proton torpedo into the core reactor. They obsess over what actually happened in the Emperor's throne room before he was killed. They mention the ground battle. If they mention it at all, they focus on the rebel troops who landed there a few days before the battle began. These historians focus on the traditional story, the story written by the rebels, that a plucky band of rebel heroes blew up the shield generator on Endor's moon, which enabled the rebel starships to destroy the Death Star. History, it is said, far, far too often is written by the victors, but we can add a caveat to that. History is only written by some of the victors. What if you were a member of an arboreal tribe without advanced technology and spoke a different language than the rest of the galaxy? What history would you write? Who would even listen? What if the most interesting part of the story of the Battle of Endor is that a tribe of Paleolithic but bloodthirsty warriors took down a galactic empire, and they never got credit for it?
This is the commander. Moments ago, this ship received word of a Cylon attack against our home worlds is underway. As of this moment, we are at war.
It's history.
The North remembers.
To Mordor and cast back into the fiery chasm from whence it came. The events.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
The only good bug is a dead bug.
Winter is coming.
The figure.
It will be a planet of apes.
The Fellowship of the Ring.
The drama.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
The 4th of July will no longer be known as an American holiday.
We know no king, But the king in the
But
north...
as the day when the world declared in one voice, we will not go quietly into the night. We will not vanish without a fight. You shall not pass! Today, we celebrate our Independence Day. It's a trap.
It's hardcore history.
I like to put myself in the shoes of people throughout time and space and multiverses and wonder what it must have been like to be them. What was it like to drop the atomic bomb for the first time in human history? What was it like to man a spear at Thermopylae, standing in some accounts up to your knees in blood? What was it like for the mobile infantry running through the rock canyons of Clendathu, clutching nothing more than a Merida assault rifle? You can only imagine. One example always stumps me. What was it like for the Mayans and Aztecs when they first saw the Spanish conquistadors? If you've lived your entire life not knowing sailing ships, not knowing horses, what is it like when suddenly strange humans land on your shore? How would you react? What would you think? I don't think from our modern perspective we can imagine how disorienting this would be. The only equivalent today would be if aliens landed from space or subterranean mole men appeared from underneath the earth. What would it truly be like to meet a technologically advanced society that you had no idea even existed? So now, imagine you're a small bear-like creature. What we're going to find out are Ewoks. Bear with me, I'm using the translation from BASIC, which was the common tongue of this galaxy we're studying. And the Ewok is the common pronunciation from historians. I may be pronouncing it wrong, so please bear with me. So say you're an Ewok and you encounter humans for the first time. What's the weirdest part? Is it the spaceships, the blasters, the clothes? See, I don't really know. It must have all been so confusing, strange, or really, for lack of a better word, alien. More importantly for the events to come is to flip this thought exercise. What did the Imperials think of the Ewoks? Of course, we know what they thought. Very little. The soldiers stationed on the forest moon of Endor were the Galactic Empire's elite stormtroopers, and these are some of the fiercest warriors in history. I mean, we're talking right up there with the traditionally elite militaries like the Roman legions or the United States colonial marines, elite like the Spartans of ancient times or the Spartans of the United Nations Space Command. So when one of the fiercest fighting forces in history encounters a bunch of, to use the diminutive descriptor favored by historians and veterans of the battle, teddy bears, they took little notice. And in a military noted for its xenophobia, this is exactly what you would expect. Ewoks look like Wookiees, but without the height, canines, or strength. I doubt an Ewok could hold a bowcaster, let alone fire it. But make no mistake about it, the Ewoks are adorable. It's almost as if they were designed to sell commercially viable products. And this is why Ewoks traditionally, if they're mentioned at all during the Battle of Endor, are mentioned as a side character. Almost every human who encountered the Ewoks discounted them, and we still discount them to this day. But as we'll learn, you should only discount the Ewoks at your own very real peril. You know, I have a problem. I'm addicted to context. As one of you said, a firm believer in the past is prologue, and there's no good natural place to start any story. Everything is connected. It's arbitrary where you decide to begin things. Like I said in the introduction, I don't have time to cover the whole Galactic Civil War, but some context is needed for why the Empire ended up on Endor in the first place. To understand the Galactic Civil War, you really need to talk about three men: Emperor Palpatine, Darth Vader, and Grand Moff Tarkin. It's hard to put into context the depravity and evil of these men, or tally the billions or hundreds of billions of sentient life forms they killed, tortured, enslaved, or forced to live in their totalitarian galactic police state. Atop all of it is Emperor Palpatine. Now, Palpatine is this galaxy's equivalent of Hitler, except the rebels didn't stop him from gaining total control of the galaxy. Born into the aristocracy on the planet of Naboo, Palpatine started as an ambassador to the Galactic Senate and eventually rose to Chancellor of the Senate, where he enacted sweeping changes during the Separatist Wars. The most important change was that he created a military for the first time in the history of the Old Republic. Palpatine, by all accounts, was a master manipulator who convinced the Senate to bow to his will and cultivated relationships with corporations, bankers, politicians, and most of all, his brand new military. Palpatine did what countless dictators throughout time and multiverses have always done. He took advantage of a crisis. Like Hitler used the Reichstag fires to gain emergency powers, as Agamemnon used Helen of Sparta to try to seize Troy, or as the leaders of Gilead used the fertility crisis to take over America, Palpatine, using the Clone Wars as pretext, took over full control of the galaxy. After that point, the Galactic Senate, having given him war powers that essentially made him emperor, was entirely powerless to stop him. Some, possibly biased sources, claim that Palpatine and another figure, the cryptically named Darth Plagueis, actually manipulated both sides of the Clone Wars, all in a vast game to gain control of the galaxy. Whatever happened behind the scenes, it appeared to have worked. Palpatine's second in command was the terrifying figure known only as Darth Vader. If Palpatine is Hitler, then it's like Genghis Khan was acting as his personal enforcer. Or problem solver in chief. Remember Luca Brasi from The Godfather? He's the hitman that Don Corleone uses to inspire fear across all other 5 families. That's him. In Westeros, Gregor the Mountain Clegane filled the same role for the Lannisters. You need someone's head chopped off, you send this man Mountain after him. If this guy's on your side, you almost can't be stopped. He's not even fully human, more machine than man, a cybernetic creature after an infamous lightsaber battle where he fell into lava. It left him permanently disfigured, covered in all black, towering over opponents at 7 feet tall, yet still quicker than any other creature in the galaxy. If stories are to believe, Vader is almost worse than Palpatine. Certainly he has more blood on his hands. There are rumors about Darth Vader, and we don't know if these stories are true. I mean, they seem so unbelievable as to beggar disbelief. In normal histories, you'd have a degree of skepticism. But they give a good flavor for how people felt about Vader. There are stories that Vader could choke people to death without even touching them. So I guess he didn't have blood directly on his hands, but you know what I mean. I've mentioned this twice already, but we do need to take a moment to discuss this galaxy's primary religion, the Force, or really mysticism, since as a religion it doesn't have apostles or priests or a church or any of that, but it does have holy books, quasi-religious rites, alleged miracles, and an epic battle between good and evil. The Jedi Knights were good, so the Sith were bad. Both Palpatine and Vader have been rumored to have been Force-sensitive individuals, and I think we all know which side they were on. Vader and Palpatine also had superpowers, including mind control, telekinesis, and more. Again, we're recounting events from a long time ago in a galaxy far away. Far be it from me to say whether any of this was true, or at least any more true than the Olympian gods turning the tide of battle in Greece and Asia Minor, as we discussed on our series on the Trojan War. Almost as soon as the Clone Wars ended, Palpatine, with his new enforcer Darth Vader, took over the entire galaxy, and almost immediately after that, star systems and planets began to rebel. They began to resist the Iron Fist, or in this case, a cybernetic black glove fist of Darth Vader. How do you pacify an entire galaxy? The manpower, the ships, the resources needed to counterattack hundreds, if not thousands, of star systems was just too immense. It took too many resources. But the Emperor had just the man to solve this problem. Grand Moff Wilhoff Tarkin is one of those rare figures you see throughout history. A man who comes into a time and place with a philosophy that's almost perfect for the war he needs to fight. To carry along the analogy from earlier, if Palpatine is Hitler and he had Genghis Khan as his second in command, well, then he had Tywin Lannister as his best commander, a cold-hearted but ruthlessly effective military officer. And when it comes to pacifying an entire galaxy, this is the type of brutal leadership it required. Tarkin grew up on Uradu, Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. But it was a backwater planet in the Outer Rim, like Naboo, which gave him a sense of kinship with Palpatine. Unlike Palpatine's peaceful childhood, Eriadu was beset by space pirates. To prepare to fight the space pirates, and that's just a cool sentence to be able to say, Tarkin spent his summers on a nature reserve known as Carrion. Carrion, like dead birds. He spent these summers hunting dangerous animals, learning how to bend nature to his will. He even survived a brutal final test in the wilderness, fighting dangerous apes alone with no weapons. Before he joined the Imperial military, he spent time as a teenager in the Outland Region Security Force, which was Iradu's local militia. A fun side note to give you a sense of Tarkin's family, his cousin Ranulph had created the ORSF and would later play a key role in starting the Trade Federation disputes that led to the Clone Wars. There's one story in particular that shows what drove Tarkin. As a 16-year-old, he had to fight a pirate named Quana. Again, I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. Quana was something of a folk hero. She'd become a bodyguard for a noble house, then one of those fun twists of history, became the paramour of the house's youngest son, who was secretly a pirate. She later had his triplets. But when he was caught and hung, she took over his pirate brand, raiding Outer Rim planets and eventually Eriadu. Tarkin outsmarted her, though, placing a virus on one of the containers that she stole, and he took her captive. Previously, pirates like Quana had been given a trial and hung, but Tarkin had a different plan. I want to quote here from a biography on Tarkin that explains how he planned to discourage the pirates. Like I said, Tarkin planned to make an example out of her. And I quote, Tarkin had Quana and her crew transferred to one of the stolen containers, whose sublight engines were programmed to send the ship slowly but inexorably toward the system's sun. The plight of the captives was broadcast over the pirates' own communications network, and several of Quana's cohorts succeeded in determining the point of origin of the transmission and hastened to her rescue. Their ships were destroyed on sight by Outland forces. Tarkin demanded that the container ship's audio and video feeds be kept enabled to the very end, so that Outland forces and any others who might have been listening could either savor or lament the agonized wails of the pirates as they were slowly roasted to death. In the end, even the notorious Quana succumbed to the torture and openly wailed. End quote. Tarkin's greatest legacy, or ill legacy, is the Tarkin Doctrine, his bold solution for the Empire's problem of how to subjugate the entire galaxy. As I mentioned before, the Emperor had a problem. How do you control a vast galaxy with finite resources? But Tarkin had a solution to this problem. What if you didn't have to? What if there was another, less resource-intensive solution? He realized, as countless autocrats throughout history have, that fear was often enough to pacify local populations. When it comes to imperial thinking, certainly the philosophical underpinnings of the Empire, this is one of the more well-recorded pieces of evidence. Even the original communique written by Tarkin, Imperial Communique number 001044.92V, which was addressed to the Emperor himself, has survived the millennia. Tarkin gave speeches on his doctrine at the time. Copies of the Imperial Handbook, the guide given to all officers in the Imperial Army, Navy, and Stormtroopers Corps, had an article by Tarkin on this doctrine. He laid out his philosophy. I quote, "Rule through the fear of force rather than force itself. If we use our strength wisely, we shall cow thousands of worlds with the example of a select few. These examples would need to be highly visible worlds whose punishment would be further revealed through our control of information via the hypermedia." End quote. And indeed, the Empire had already started moving in this direction. Star Destroyers were effective not just because of their firepower, but also because of their sheer physical size. Mainly, you could see one from orbit. Imagine you're a civilian on a planet that's rebelling against the Empire. You said, we're going to stop paying our taxes. You've seized the local garrisons, perhaps place mines in orbit. You're going to show the Empire now what you can do, the small little backwater planet that you are. Then a Star Destroyer shows up in your upper atmosphere. A Star Destroyer that can lay waste to a planet's surface using its turbo lasers alone. You're gripped with terror. But Tarkin went a step further, conceiving of the ultimate weapon. And I quote again. The average citizen deals in symbols, not rational analysis. If we present the galaxy with a weapon so powerful, so immense as to defy all conceivable opposition against it, a weapon invulnerable and invincible in battle, then that weapon shall become the symbol of the Empire. The fear such a weapon will inspire will be great enough for you to rule the galaxy unchallenged. End quote. Sure enough, Emperor Palpatine was impressed. He had Grand Moff Tarkin begin work on such a weapon, this ultimate weapon. As we all know, it would come to be called the Death Star. So Tarkin went out and hired a famed Imperial scientist named Bevel Lemelisk, and together they built this weapon, taking nearly a generation to finally finish construction. At least, that's the traditional story. But revisionist historians have recently uncovered new sources that have upturned this narrative. These new historians question almost every detail in the traditional narrative and story we've come to know. And you can understand why it is so easy for historians to come in and upturn that story. The Empire tried to build the Death Star in secret, and he even had spies deliberately spreading misinformation. Then the Rebel Alliance used the destruction of the first Death Star as their biggest propaganda point. This is all to say, anything we do know about the Death Star we are lucky to know, and it could all be wrong. Propaganda from either side. Now, I'm not a historian, I've said that many times. I'm just a fan of history, so I'm going to try to do my best to tell you what I think happened, or the options that could have happened. We have quite a few sources on the construction of the Death Star, but many of the sources conflict, or some of them directly contradict each other. One says it was built here, one says it was built there, one says that so-and-so designed it, one says another person entirely. And this debate is still ongoing. New histories keep appearing, mostly every December, so I'll have to do my best to wade through all of these contradicting sources. I'll start with what we don't know. Who designed it, who built it, where they built it, and how long it took. That's it, I can hear you asking? Let's start with who designed it. In any account, Tarkin was the mastermind behind the base, but he wasn't an engineer. Who did he hire to build it? Again, many sources in the traditional narrative point to genius engineer Bevel Lemelisk. We have sources saying that he designed both the first and second Death Star. This project was so important that Lemelisk and Tarkin assembled a dream team of scientists to build it. Recently unearthed records of the Death Star, though, omit Lemelisk entirely. In this narrative, Tarkin hired Director of Advanced Weaponry Orson Krennic, who relied on scientist Galen Erso to build the super laser. In a project of this size, it's possible that all the people mentioned, Lemelisk, Krennic, Orso, were involved at some point, and we're talking a matter of emphasis rather than whether these people did exist and who did what for the Death Star. I should pause on that last name, though, Galen Erso. According to the Rebel Alliance, he was the designer who deliberately inserted a fatal flaw into the Death Star, which his daughter found when she rescued smuggled Death Star plans, which she then gave to the Rebel Alliance. And if that all sounds too good to be true, it just may be. Especially because all of this could just be Rebel propaganda. I know the Rebel Alliance are the good guys, but like the United States in World War II, even the good guys can use propaganda. Is this whole Galen Erso and his daughter saving the universe just a bit too good to be true? Who can say? We also don't know where the Death Star was constructed or by whom. Again, it goes to which account you rely on above. So far, I've read different historians having it built over Geonosis, a random planet in the Outer Rim, the prison planet of Despair, which for a long time was the main place it was built. Or it was moved to Jeddah to mine Kyber crystals, then later it orbited Scarab. Some accounts describe a huge logistical network to support its construction. Some don't, just saying that it was built by slaves, and these are the older accounts. Either way, we'll likely never know the true location just due to competing versions of events, or if it traveled around. Here's what we do know. As a weapon, the Death Star was awesome. And I mean that in the original supernova exploding sense of the word, the way scientists use it. There's really no other word for it. It just inspires pure awe. And unlike other details of its history, the specs for the Death Star are almost infamous. Like it's the one part of the Death Star that the Emperor wanted everyone to know. Like you should know this is a really lethal piece of machinery that I've created. As an interesting side note, the Death Star's technical name was DS-1, implying that the Imperial Navy had always planned to build multiple Death Stars. It's almost hard to conceive of the first Death Star from our vantage point. This was a weapon of unimaginable size and power. The Death Star had a diameter of 120 kilometers. It was manned by over 1.5 million people, roughly equivalent to America's entire military, and could carry an additional 800,000 people. And the crew was supplemented by 400,000 more droids. The number of turbo lasers is so huge you almost can't believe it, 15,000. And it also carried over 7,000 TIE fighters. No armada could hope to defeat it. And its crown jewel was a super weapon even more fearsome. A super laser that could blow planets to pieces. Before we consider the destruction of Death Star 1 as an all-out victory, let's consider the almost immeasurable damage it had already done. We know that it fired its super weapon multiple times. In one story, Tarkin fired the weapon at partial power just to crack the crust of a planet, vaporizing all the inhabitants. In another account, Krennic did the same thing, blowing up the capital of Jeddah. Other accounts have the Death Star blowing up a frigate in combat, blowing up their own Imperial base on Scarif, and blowing up a city on Malpaz as a test. But the largest loss of life was the destruction of Alderaan and its 2 billion inhabitants. If you were making a list of the greatest mass murders in all multiverses, like the Cylon destruction of the colonies, Thanos wiping out half of all living life forms, Ender Wiggins killing an entire species, the Formex, this probably makes the list. It's simply breathtaking in its scale. Earlier I called the Death Star awesome. This was a machine that was perfect. Or should I say, almost perfect. It had a 3-meter wide exhaust port which, if a proton torpedo were fired inside, could trigger a chain reaction blowing up the entire thing. Which is exactly what happened at the Battle of Yavin, killing Grand Moff Tarkin in the process. What do you do if your first Death Star gets destroyed? You build another one. You learn your lessons from the first Death Star, which was attacked at least 3 times during its construction. First, you actually keep it a secret. Well, first you fix the exhaust ports, which Bevel Emelisk did. Then you actually keep it a secret. The first Death Star was widely rumored across the galaxy before its completion, as if the Emperor wanted the benefits of a Death Star, the fear, without actually having to have one yet. This was obviously, in retrospect, a huge mistake, but it was one the Emperor wouldn't make again, keeping it top secret until the information fell, or was dropped, into the hands of Bothan spies. Next, you build it quicker. It took 21 years to build the first Death Star by the shortest estimate. The Emperor planned to build the second one in much less time. Next, you find a remote planet, or moon, but like beyond remote, more like undiscovered. With this isolation, the Emperor could finally keep his new battle station well hidden and truly secret. Finally, you build a shield generator on the new planet. This way, even if the rebels do attack, they can't harm the Death Star and its protective shield. The initial plan was to find a completely remote planet and build a specially designed hyperspace lane from Solus, the galaxy's manufacturing hub, to this new remote planet in a remote sector. On the orders of the Emperor himself, the Imperial Navy sent out thousands of scouting teams to find this ideal location. And this is how the Empire arrived at the forest moon of Endor. We have accounts from both scouting parties, and they're fascinating historical documents. Mainly, they give a glimpse into the world of Imperial thinking, or lack thereof. And to clarify, people of the time in historian sense have referred to it as the forest moon of Endor, or just the forest moon, or just Endor, and we'll use all three interchangeably, but yes, I am aware that it is a moon and not a planet. Officially, the first expedition to Endor is known as Imperial Survey Team IX-3244B, and was led by Captain Toss, a man whose best trait seemed to have been his hunger to move up the chain of command, and whose worst trait was his cowardice. His second in command was Lieutenant Kiviat. Lieutenant Kiviat's debrief following the Battle of Endor survives to this day, as collected by New Republic historian Lieutenant Voron Null. He's a figure who did a lot of work recording the history of the Rebel Alliance and the Empire. We'll lean heavily on his records and his details. He interviewed many of the primary sources of this galaxy, and his records are just a tremendous source of historical information. So Toss and Kiviat had surveyed several planets before arriving at Endor. As soon as they arrived, though, Captain Toss seemed ready to declare victory. "Command, this is Toss. Found it. Search over. Promote me." He was excited by the remoteness of the moon. He was even more excited when his initial scans revealed only savages, I quote, in tree villages that were less than 1 meter in height. Since the moon had life forms with possible intelligence, though, Imperial protocol dictated that a scouting party was needed to survey the moon in person. In Kiviat's account, almost dripping with sarcasm, he says that he was tasked to go because Toss was burdened with important duties on the ship. Before Kiviat's ship even left the hangar, Toss had already sent a holo report to Darth Vader claiming the mission was successful and the new home for the Death Star had been found. On Endor, Kiviat, 2 stormtroopers, and 2 scouts landed on what would eventually become the clearing for the shield generator. They snuck off to the Ewok village, trying to move quietly through the forest. Based on accounts from the Ewoks on the ground, these urban-born Imperials, who might never have been in a forest before, weren't quiet at all. Kiviat's goal was just to get to the Ewok village, yet his patrol never made it. Somehow the Ewoks managed to keep the scouting patrol lost. This quote from Kiviat shows the strange and creepy ability of the Ewoks to mislead the humans. I quote from Kiviat directly. "Somehow, the best scouts in the business kept losing their way. We went down one path only to have it stop in a dead end. We traced our way back, but found ourselves in a clearing we hadn't entered before. We took readings and made map adjustments, then plunged down another path. It turned us around and we wound up back by the shuttle. It was as though the forest itself was conspiring against us. We were intruders here, aliens, and the forest was letting us know we didn't belong. I don't know how they did it, but the Ewoks kept us moving in circles for over 2 hours." End quote. As darkness fell, the Ewoks began banging on their war drums, a psychological warfare tactic we'll see again. The Imperial spooks started firing randomly into the forest. As soon as Kiviat and his team made it back to the shuttle, they took off. Upon returning to the orbiting ship, Captain Toss dismissed Kiviat's worries with laughter and mockery. I mean, after all, who's really afraid of some savages with arrows and spears? The Emperor liked Endor, but rightly felt that they didn't have quite enough information. And yes, I believe this mission was so important that the Emperor himself probably personally intervened. So they sent a sergeant, a non-commissioned officer, not even a warrant officer, who was a records clerk previously. Of all the people in the entire galaxy they could send, they sent him. The sergeant's name was Philby Jorn, and Jorn's story was captured in a book of first-person accounts of various planets read by Professor Kevin J. Anderson. Professor Anderson, in his preface to Philby Jorn's account, describes the situation this way. Displeased with the superficial reports of the first scouting team, the Emperor requested a detailed summary. Sergeant Jorn filed several memos before his departure, insisting that he was not qualified for the job, but these memos were misfiled or never delivered to Sergeant Jorn's superiors. End quote. You may rightly think that first expedition couldn't have gone worse. But the second recon mission, the second survey, was somehow even more of a disaster than the first one. It's one of those stories from history that's almost too good to be believed. Jorn's scouting mission had more resources than Kiviat's, which doesn't say much. The second expedition to the Forest Moon seemed completely unorganized, undermanned, and undersupplied. I quote again from Jorn, now his first-person account. Of course, the first team's lack of thoroughness may be understandable if they were as poorly equipped as my team proved to be. When the transport ship dropped us off and shuttled our supplies down, we were appalled to find that only a group of 2-rider ATST scout transports had been assigned to the entire task of covering a world. The food packs contained only the worst sorts of rations, leftovers from the Clone Wars, no doubt. The garment bins contained ice assault suits decommissioned after the raid on Hoth. I had heard grumblings about incompetence, nepotism, and corruption in the Imperial Navy, and now I had no doubt. End quote. After landing on the surface, one of the team's ATSTs immediately broke down, requiring repairs. While they waited, a stormtrooper nearly had his hand ripped off by a tempter, a large predator that lures prey with a fake rodent on its tongue. After fixing their ATST, the team finally reached an Ewok village, and one survey team member took an exhaustive study of the Ewoks and their culture. This study became one of our best sources on Ewok culture, but again, to highlight the dysfunction, Jorn thought it was all a waste of time. Which is a shame, because that's about the only part of the mission that actually went well. From there, the team moved on to the mountains of Endor and were promptly captured by the Gorax, a humanoid creature over 30 meters tall which delighted in hunting, eating, or collecting the Ewoks to use as pets. For him, the shiny white stormtroopers were a delightful addition to his collection. The team managed to escape after losing only 2 crew members. From this disaster, the team moved on to the plains of Endor, only to get captured a second time by a band of marauders, a group of technologically incompetent space pirates that wound up marooned after crashing on Endor, unable to fix their ship. Unlike Tiviot, Jorn kept excellent records of his survey, and his reports provides one of the best accounts of the flora, fauna, and terrain of Endor. But the report Jorn sent back to his superiors seems to have been completely ignored. Or, at least his warnings went completely unheeded. Why did the Emperor choose Endor? Because he thought it was perfect. First, it was remote. Both survey teams mentioned this in their report. I'll quote again. The Endor system is extremely remote, not just from the core systems, but also from other Imperial bases, common trade routes, and other inhabited worlds. The captain of our transport claimed that simply reaching Endor involves a half a dozen tricky hyperspace maneuvers, something to do with the enormous gravity of the gas giant and the uncharted space in the sector. End quote. Second, Endor could support life. The first survey team established that Endor had a diverse ecosystem that could comfortably sustain human life. Sure, they could have chosen a barren rock, but Vader considered that to be a waste of time, as Tiviot describes in his truly whiny style. I quote again, "Personally, I thought it would be more prudent to build the shield generator on some barren rock with low gravity and a poisonous atmosphere, no indigenous life to interfere with the work, a dangerous environment, and no cover for rebel commando operations." However, Vader was of the opinion that it would consume much needed time and energy to construct life support systems and domes for a simple shield generator outpost. My commanding officer, Captain Toss, agreed. End quote. Third, the other planets in the Endor system were surprisingly resource-rich, especially with the planet Dor, which had numerous precious metals needed by the Empire to construct the second Death Star. Fourth, Endor may have been strong in the Force, a religious aspect which was important to Palpatine as a Sith Lord. Maybe this intrigued the Emperor more than anything else? Finally, the Force Moon was completely uninhabited by hostile creatures. This last point should give you pause. We're going to return again and again in this series to the mistakes made by the Empire because they were numerous. But the first biggest mistake, the mistake if you will, was assuming that there was nothing on Endor that could kill you. Or put another way, the Empire failed to actually do reconnaissance of the Force Moon. I doubt the descriptions of either survey team would inspire much confidence, especially since any honest description of the moon would make you say, I'm not going there. The best example I can think of in modern times is if you've ever read a National Geographic description of the Amazon. It's an environment where it seems like literally everything in the forest can kill you. It's all poisonous or it's trying to eat you, with 20-foot-long snakes, jaguars, river caiman, poisonous frogs, ants, insects, spiders, and plants. Even the Amazon's adorable river otters are fierce alpha carnivores that fight those very same river caiman. You just want to throw your hands up and say, how does anyone live there? Endor is like that. Start with the terrain, or more precisely, the lack of terrain that you could move through. In almost every account, every time an ATST tried to walk through the forest, it broke down. Even scarier, though, is the list of creatures that can kill you, which is beyond imagining. Including the Tempter, which I mentioned earlier, nearly took off one of the arms of Jorn's men. Or the giant boar wolves, which Jorn describes as shaggy boar wolves have tusked teeth and a keen sense of smell and saber-like claws that can tear holes in trees. End quote. Then there are the Condor dragons, and I'll quote Jorn again. Flying reptilian creatures with bony ridges along their spines, a Condor dragon has a single fused fang for tearing through the thick hides of its prey, and 2 long lower tusks for brutal stabs and a quick kill. End quote. And those are just the non-sentient beings. The biggest threat to Ewok villages on Endor was the Gorax, that same creature that killed at least 2 of Jorn's men just by trying to peel off their armor to see what was inside. The Gorax had hunted Ewoks for centuries, possibly millennia. Ewoks spent their lives preparing to fight, hide from, and defend against Gorax attacks, something we should keep in mind for later. As far as we know, the Imperials never encountered a Gorax on Endor while constructing the shield generator. Perhaps the Gorax was smart enough to avoid what almost certainly would have been certain doom. Or perhaps the Gorax was another example of more myth than reality. As far as the Marauders go, there's no account of them encountering the Empire during the construction of the second Death Star. They appear to either have been killed in battle by the Ewoks or were also smart enough to avoid the Empire. The life forms on Endor were nothing if not hostile. I mean, like I said, it's the Amazon equivalent. How does anyone live there? But the Imperial Navy and Emperor Palpatine could rightly believe they could handle the non-sentient life with a few well-placed blaster shots, especially if they didn't venture too far out into the forest. I don't think anyone was planning on that. Even the Gorax wouldn't have been much of a match for the AT-AT that guarded the landing platform, plus they could see it coming from miles away. It'd be too easy to launch TIE fighters to respond. If the Marauders attacked, well, they fought conventionally and certainly had less training experience and weaponry than the Imperials. As we'll see, the Empire should have been concerned about the Ewoks, but they didn't give a damn. Why not? Because of the Imperial military's massive hatred of non-human species. Their xenophobia, or speciesism, if I can adopt a phrase used by current animal rights activists. The Empire was notoriously xenophobic and pro-human species, staffed from top to bottom with humans, mostly white, mostly men. There were a few exceptions, the most famous of which is Grand Admiral Thrawn, who was either a general during the Clone Wars or was a leader of the remaining Imperial forces in the fight against the New Republic. I should mention we have 2 completely contradictory sources on Thrawn. I tend to find the older sources on his post-Battle of Endor exploits to be more convincing for my taste. You see this xenophobia in every Imperial source you can find. When it came to Ewoks, the thinking was, don't worry about them, just a bunch of teddy bears with pointing sticks, who cares? And it's not like the Empire was unique in this respect. Countless militaries across all time and space, even our own timeline and planet, are racist or specious, referring to their enemies as subhuman. It's even easier to do when your enemy isn't actually human. And really, who can blame the Imperials themselves for underestimating the Ewoks? The vast majority of historians and researchers, even the rebels and pro-rebel historians, describe the Ewoks using similar language. Xenophobia or racism, it isn't just a moral or ethical failing. Obviously, from our enlightened point of view today, we know that shouldn't judge people just based on their race or species. But when it comes to fighting wars, it can also be a tactical failing. It can blind you to the actual strength of your enemy. And the Empire was blinded to the strength of the Ewoks because of their speciesism. Following the initial surveys of the Forest Moon, after the Empire finally chose Endor as the home base for the construction of his all-new sequel, the all-powerful superweapon, again, I think the Emperor micromanaged this enterprise so closely that he made the final call. So the Emperor chooses this planet, he chooses Endor or its moon, and the Imperial Navy sends a garrison to construct the shield generator. An account comes down to us from one stormtrooper that I think foreshadows almost everything to come, and like many great anecdotes throughout history, this one is almost too good to be true. According to the soldier, the first garrison landed on the forest and they began patrols as you would expect of any Imperial unit on a new moon. They expected to encounter Ewoks, but they didn't worry from the anonymous veteran's account of the conflict. When we were first dispatched on Endor, we knew there was a tribal or arboreal culture there, but we were the Empire. We had the text, the troops, the numbers. Who cared? End quote. After marching through the thick, overgrown, impossibly green forest of Endor, they encountered a group of 5 Ewoks. I would add it is interesting the Ewoks let them approach as opposed to misleading them as they had the initial survey expedition. At this point, Chief Sherpa must have known the Imperials were here to stay. Either way, 5 armed Imperials see a group of armed Ewoks. The Ewoks emerged from the forest carrying flowers, a gift to their new neighbors. As the two groups approached, a lone female Ewok broke from the pack and placed a flower in the blaster rifle of a stormtrooper. What do you do if you are an elite military unit and someone tries to put something in your rifle? That's the equivalent of trying to jam it from a certain point of view. A military point of view. So the stormtroopers did what you would expect. They started shooting. Whether this encounter happened or not, it symbolizes one very important thing. The Imperials and the Ewoks had gone to war. We're brought to you by the Great Matrix Courses. If you like hardcore history, you love learning and history, so you'll probably love the Great Matrix Courses too. It's even easier to use Great Matrix Courses if you've been recently pulled from a cocoon of force-sized slave labor, and especially if you have a plug directly into your brainstem that can automatically upload all information in the universe. Oh, and your old world was a lie. The Great Matrix Courses is a fantastic way to learn about things that you know nothing about from some of the world's truly great professors. They will offer you unlimited access to download thousands of different programs. Ignore those operations programs, which are major boring shit, and skip to combat. In addition to learning kung fu, swordplay, and small weapons training, learn about topics like military history, weaponry, and the engineering behind exostructures, all downloaded straight into your brainstem. We think listeners of hardcore history would particularly like a history of martial arts from Anbo Jitsu to Echani. You'll get to learn about the great martial arts, including ones you've heard of like Teres Kase to ones you might not have like card throwing or Makbara, so try it out. If you like kung fu, you'll like this. So pick the blue pill or the red pill, whichever pill has you go into the Great Matrix Courses today. So go to greatmatrixcourses.com/fakead to subscribe today. Before we sign off on this episode, I want to talk a bit about the journey of the Ewoks. Following the Battle of Endor, they went from unknown backwater species to galactic celebrities overnight, known as the small teddy bears that brought an empire to its knees. Everyone loves tales about plucky underdogs defeating evil. That's basically what the Rebel Alliance was, and the Ewoks are the ultimate sidekicks. So everyone in the galaxy started telling stories or looking for stories, and scores of holovids and comic books bear their names and stories, getting increasingly absurd as time went on. I mention this because it's incredibly hard to pin down an actual history of the Ewoks. It's even tougher to separate fact from fiction from myth. Let me provide an example. There's a story about the Ewoks involving a wizard, what we would assume is a Jedi or a Dark Jedi or a Sith Lord, who created an ice demon to attack Wicket, Logray, and Chief Chirpa. It's so fanciful it beggars disbelief. We don't even know if Ewoks were known outside of Endor before this battle that made them so famous. Some accounts from as early as the Clone Wars indicate that restaurants served Ewoks as food, but this almost certainly has to be discounted as a translation error. Some accounts have Yuzums, another species on Endor, and Jabba's palace. Likely, these are revisionist tales about the Ewoks in Endor. After this now beyond famous battle, people started making some stuff up. I say again, we don't know what we don't know, which inevitably happened studying a war from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.